Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 308 of Humanity Rising. It's a beautiful day in September here in California. I hope it's a beautiful day wherever you are. We are very pleased that the community that has been supporting Humanity Rising continues to grow and continues to expand. We're in over 130 countries now. We're broadcasting to tens of thousands of people every day. So I just want to welcome you in the spirit of an approaching equinox as people all over the world are going back to school and are entering into the fall season or the spring season if you're in the southern hemisphere. With all the turbulence in the world, it's a beautiful world, and it's a great time to be alive. So I just wanted to welcome everybody in the spirit of joy and thanksgiving for the community that we have and the dreams and the visions that we share. As we begin, let us pause as we always do, and let us just connect with our bodies. Take a breath, close your eyes, and let us attune to our hearts. We all have beating hearts. Let us attune just for a minute or so to our heartbeat in a spirit of thanksgiving and gratitude that we're alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Let us send love to people we know and to all sentient beings. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our session today, I want to begin our program by just tying together a few of the themes that have been coming to the fore over the last couple of days as we've resumed our fall programming on the 1st of September. We started with a whole program on the Global Regeneration Corps that is being launched by hundreds of organizations that have been coming together through Humanity Rising. We will be saying more about that as we traverse the next couple of weeks and months. It's a major impulse for people coming together. But then we also wanted to take note, as we always do on Humanity Rising, some of the reasons why it is so challenging, and in fact, in some places impossible, to get the kind of momentum of vision and purpose and practical action to do something that is completely as obvious as dealing with climate change. Last Friday, we spent an entire session looking at this phenomenon in Canada, but also in the United States, of mass graves of Indigenous children that had been taken from their families, put in Christian schools, and brutalized in all kinds of physical and sexual ways as the Christian schools backed up by the Canadian and US governments sought to convert, and if not to convert, then to kill children, some of whom were as little as 3 years old. That's a very troubling phenomenon for any culture, any society that considers themselves to be civilized in any way. So yesterday, we deepened the exploration. How is it possible for Christians to kill children with intent and systematic precision, and then put them in mass graves? How does that happen? So we explored the phenomenon of Christo-fascism with Carolyn Baker, who's just written a book by that title. And we spent an hour yesterday really looking at this amalgamation between Christian evangelical Protestant, evangelical fundamentalism, and the coercive power of the state in a way that illuminated what has happened in the past, but what is currently happening, particularly in the United States of America today, so that we're not dealing with something that's ancient, something that happened, in the last century or 2 centuries ago. We're dealing with a mentality, a coalition between religious extremism and political extremism, Christo-fascism that is gaining ascendancy in the corridors of power, has seized the entire Republican Party. And in those states where the Republicans are in majorities, essentially the Christo-fascists are now suppressing the democratic right to vote. And most recently, in the state of Texas, just last week, are now going after the right of women over their own bodies. And in the aftermath of that, there have been a number of states, Republican-controlled, like Texas, that have enacted similar pieces of legislation. At the heart of Christo-fascism is a religious fundamentalism that denies nature, that subordinates women, that is intensely racist. And when you bring that religious fundamentalism together with state power, so you have the coercive power of the state to implement an extremist religious vision of the world, you have what happened in Texas last week. Over against the majority of its own population. There is nevertheless a focused implementation of laws that disregard nature, that disregard democracy, disregard racial equality, and disregard the rights of women. So today we thought we would interrupt the current programming and bring us up to date on what's going on in Texas. And I want to now introduce Shelley Alcorn, and you'll know Shelley because from last fall, Shelley has been with us on Humanity Rising as our commentator. You remember she had a commentary around the election last November, where she predicted that the Trump administration would not go quietly into the dark night, but would foment rebellion, which actually took place on January 6th. So Shelley has been a commentator and has been uncannily accurate in her predictions about how things are transpiring here in the United States and the implications for countries abroad, because this authoritarianism, this amalgamation of religious extremism and coercive state power is not unique to the United States. You see it in different parts of the world. We're seeing it in Afghanistan with the rise of the Taliban. We see it in the Modi government in India. We're seeing it down in Brazil. So this is not a unique phenomenon, but it is probably most acute here in the United States. So Shelley, welcome to the program. And Shelley will give a presentation, and then I'll have some questions, and obviously look for any of you that have questions or comments in the chat. And if we have time, we can bring maybe a couple of you onto a video interaction with Shelley, because we know that this is an emotional issue. It's an issue that cuts to the heart of women's equality and reproductive health. So we want to make as available as we can the kind of discussion that will ensue from Shelley's remarks. But welcome, Shelley, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I am happy to be with you. However, not happy to be speaking on the topics that I'm speaking on, which seems to be a familiar refrain for me these days. But I really want to couch what has happened in Texas in historical context in the United States. I truly believe that it is very hard for us to understand current events if we don't have an understanding of where those events came from. So the Texas bill, in addition to being an egregious assault on women's autonomy and women's ability to make decisions, has some deeply, deeply troubling and problematic elements into it that are not getting as much play as they probably should be outside of the United States. But we'll talk about those things as I move through my presentation. So in order to understand where we are, we have to understand where we've been. And everything that I'm going to talk about has a direct relevance to what just happened in Texas that was effectively sanctioned by the Supreme Court of the United States, the thing that we were concerned about and worried about beginning all the way back, really for the last 30 years, but acutely since the 2016 election in the United States. And the first thing that we need to talk about is sort of this specious historical context in the United States of who gets to control whose bodies and for what reason and for what purpose. Obviously, we have a long history in the United States of a running debate about who has the authority to decide what happens to their own body. In many ways, a discussion we should have gotten beyond by now, but we haven't. And there are a number of reasons for that. There are also a number of bills that have been passed in Texas in the last week or so that also are related to the first Texas bill on restrictions around women's autonomy, but have their roots in what we're going to talk about now. So let's just jump in. Vigilantism in the United States, we have a long, sordid history with vigilante groups inside the United States. Groups of citizens believing that they could institute their will on other citizens, sometimes in contradiction to the state, and sometimes with federal state support. Deep, deep roots. And you see it play out in current language that you hear today. When you hear politicians in the United States talking about needing to be vigilant, that is a nod to vigilantism. And we'll talk a little bit about where that historical context comes from. So now we are being asked to be vigilant about American principles and vigilant about protection of our citizens and vigilant about our fellow citizens and what they may or may not be talking about. Right from the beginning, we've had vigilante groups. Talk briefly, 1767 to 1769, we had the regulator movements in South Carolina. In Revolutionary Virginia, we had Colonel Charles Lynch, who became famous for taking extra-legal summary executions against Tories and other outlaws in Virginia. You'll notice his last name, Lynch, is related to lynching, which is a term that we use today for extrajudicial killings of people of color or others, LGBTQ members, other members of the community who are dispatched of in that horrifying way. Vigilantism moved westward after the Revolutionary War as the westward expansion was taking place, 1767 to 1910. There were 326 vigilante movements and episodes. You can watch an Old West movie, Cowboys, and you'll see the deputizing citizens, rounding up a posse and going after the bad guys. That is endemic in this idea in the United States that law enforcement, when necessary, can deputize citizens to help them accomplish their goals. It's something that is enshrined in American mythology, and it's something that has played out in practice against many different communities in the United States since. In 1793, of course, we had the Fugitive Slave Act that was passed, which basically professionalized bounty hunting in the United States, where men were able to go hunt fugitive slaves and turn them in for a bounty to plantation owners and owners, quote unquote, of those people. Sometimes getting the right person wasn't even necessary. As long as you could kidnap someone and bring them back, well, they could be forced into labor and you would get your bounty anyway. So this is a sordid history. In 1850, we had to pass a second Fugitive Slave Act law because people were pushing back against the first one and saying, I don't think this is a good idea. And they strengthened the laws and they instituted harsher punishments for aiding and abetting. And this is important. Remember this is coming up again, aiding and abetting slaves who were attempting to evade capture. So punishment was instituted for people who were helping with the Underground Railroad and other things like that. So we have the Civil War and we have all of these things happening, and we all know what happened in the aftermath of the Civil War. But then we roll into the 1930s. Now, the 1930s and the 1950s were very important when it comes to how we understand vigilantism in the United States. And in 1938, there was a group established called the American Protective League. It was a short-lived organization historically. It was short-lived, but it had an outsized impact on this concept of private citizens taking action against other citizens, for perceived violations of the law or social norms or morals, all that good stuff. They basically organized volunteers who helped the US federal government root out radicals. In the 1930s, that was German citizens because of World War I and the tensions around that. It was applied to all manner of political activity that was being pursued, particularly women who wanted the right to vote at that time. In those days, that was considered problematic for many, many reasons. Women did not deserve the right to vote on the part of many people. Seth Wheeler was the former chief of the APL's Albany division. And here's what he wrote in the aftermath of the APL. And I'm going to quote from this. And I do apologize because, as usual, my desk is just covered with notes and I'm looking at them as I go. So, but what Seth Wheeler said was the initials APL mean little or nothing to the great majority of our country. But without it, the Bureau of Investigation, which became the Federal Bureau of Investigation, this is the precursor to the establishment of the FBI. Without it, the Bureau of Investigation would have been unable to operate at the scale necessary to combat the activities of over 250,000 members of various secret enemy organizations. In that article, he predicted it was only a matter of time before Uncle Sam would be imperiled by foreign wars and seditious citizens, and patriotic citizens of America would always be ready to jump in and do their bit. So the APL really grew considerably during World War I. They policed the boundaries of what was known as acceptable speech and deployed the language of patriotism for the purpose of expanding their activities and eliminating challenges to the economic order. And the economic order were, of course, the elites who were in power and the capitalist system behind it. So the APL is a group of volunteers running around policing people and going after challenges to the economic order. The APL actually achieved quasi-official status in 1918, where the Bureau of Investigation sort of gave them permission. They gave them badges. They said they couldn't arrest anybody, but they could participate in activities and support the FBI with different activities. One of the biggest of those took place with 35 Bureau of Investigation agents, 2,000 APL volunteers, several hundred police officers, and 2,300 military personnel who arrested about 50,000 slackers accused of evading the World War I draft. So they got down and dirty chasing people who were conscientious objectors or who did not register for the draft. So even though they couldn't technically arrest people, the APL did lots and lots of things with this cover as being a quasi-governmental organization. They reported on suspicious activity repeatedly. They demanded proof of citizenship, particularly from German Americans, Jews, Catholics, anyone that they decided was an unworthy person. They broke up political meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And remember, at this time, see, these things are always connected, right? Women are pursuing the right to vote. Catholic and Jewish immigrants are coming to America and they're organizing. Labor shortages from the war were allowing for worker shortages, which allowed for workers to go on strike and to begin to ask for better conditions in the workplace. And obviously, we're still struggling with race issues in America. So let's fast forward a little bit. APL sort of recedes in the background. FBI becomes what it becomes. Vigilante groups are still operating in the US, but they're kind of under the radar. And then we have the McCarthy era. And the McCarthy era, I won't go into it now, but those of you who are familiar with it, and probably most of you are, that was Senator Joe McCarthy, who was trying to root out communism and asking people to turn their neighbors in for being communists or suspected communist sympathizers all the way through the 50s, 1950s. And that brings us to the 1960s. And in the 1960s, things began to change. And we began to see some actual civil rights legislation being passed in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Let's talk a little bit about those particular pieces, because women's rights and people of color, it's intersectional, it's not the same, there's different privilege on different levels, and I understand that. I'm just using a broad brush to explain sort of the thinking in the country at the time. 1954, we had Brown versus the Board of Education, which ended school segregation. In 1965, we had a Supreme Court decision that couples could use contraception. Before then, married couples could not use contraception to prevent pregnancy. 1965. I was born 3 years later. Okay. This is maddening and bizarre to me that this was even a thing, but okay. In 1967, we got the decision where interracial couples could marry legally in the United States. And in 1973, we got Roe versus Wade. All of those things are civil rights. All of those things come from the same idea, which is who has autonomy over decisions about their bodies, where their bodies go to school, where their bodies can work, where their bodies can be used or not used for medical purposes, who their bodies could marry. This is all about control and social sanction. In the 1960s, women finally obtained the right to open a checking account without their father or without their husband's permission. In the 1960s, this is not that long ago. Well, maybe it is. I'm a little older than I'd like to admit, perhaps, but holy cow. And in 1974, women finally got the right to have their own credit card in their own name. 1974. It was the Equal Credit Act, which removed gender as a criteria for the issuance of credit, such as credit cards, buying a car, buying a home, etc. Now, were women discriminated against? Absolutely. Did they make it hard for women? Absolutely. But did we make strides? Absolutely. We did. I have freedoms today that my parents didn't have, and certainly my grandparents did not have. And this was all done due to the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which was passed in the wake of the Civil War. And Congress had to pass the 14th Amendment because of the black codes that former Confederate states were imposing that severely limited Black people's rights in the South. So that's where the 14th Amendment comes from. And that is the basis for Roe v. Wade and for all of the other civil rights legislation that we're talking about. Now, the vigilante movements in the United States didn't stop at that point. Vigilantes on the Mexican border operated in the 1980s with a self-styled mission to stop undocumented immigrants. So we see women's rights, we see this function, and all this time we're thinking things are kind of getting better, but in the US, we are aware that there are still groups out there that are armed and that are acting extrajudicially and that are pursuing the restriction of rights of women, people of color, immigrants, whoever it happens to be. And in the first decade of the 21st century, that's now, that's in the 2000s, that's now, the first decade of the 21st century, the Minutemen groups became among the most prominent militias in the US on the border with their vigilance operations against undocumented people. There was another militia or another vigilante group, which are closely related to militias, but different. They have a different flavor sometimes. Established in the 1990s, they boasted that they had detained 12,000 illegal immigrants between 1990 and 2006. So these are vigilante groups who are detaining people and supposedly turning them over to Immigration and Enforcement. Arizona Border Recon is another vigilante group established in the 1990s and 2000s. And a number of bills were introduced in a number of states to formalize their activities on behalf of the US government in the 2000s in the United States. So, okay, so that brings us to 2016. And 2016 unleashed the things that we had been hiding, I suppose, in the United States. And what I'm here to tell you is that Trumpism and the cult of Trump, as we can call it, that was a top-down attempt to control the population in what manner they wanted to and enforce their will on the United States citizenry. And through a soft coup and a hard coup, they were beat back for the moment. But what is happening now is the thing that I was most worried about, and that is Trumpism is metastasizing. It is metastasizing at the state level very quickly and in very, very dangerous ways. The assault on voting rights across the United States since the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is egregious. And an assault on voting rights always is accompanied with an assault on people of color and an assault on women, because it's all seen as part and parcel of the same problem that too many people have a voice in the United States, that the right people don't, the right people, the right laws, the right things are being resisted by people who believe in their autonomy as human beings and their dignity and their right to make their own choices about their own futures. So let's talk about the Texas bill in particular and why it relates to vigilantism and informism in the United States and the other laws that were simultaneously passed that makes this even worse. So the Texas bill prohibits abortion after 6 weeks. 6 weeks, 90% of women, 95% of women, maybe 98% of women don't know they're pregnant yet. Or maybe they suspect, but the hormones aren't there so that they can confirm that they're pregnant yet. 6 weeks is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And they're basing it on this pseudo-scientific theory that you'll hear in the news, the heartbeat bill. There's a heartbeat at 6 weeks. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. There's no heart at 6 weeks. This is a misnomer. This is a mischaracterization. It's a scientific it's wrong. What is heard is the woman's heartbeat running through the tissue. It's not, it's specious. There is no exception for rape or incest. No exception for rape and incest. There is a slight exception for health and survival of the mother, but that is pretty much secondary. That's pretty much secondary. You have to prove that you're going to die. And what it does is it creates a $10,000 bounty for citizens in Texas who report and successfully sue anybody that they believe has aided or abetted the woman who is in trouble. So let's just think about that for a second. In a post-pandemic era, with economics being so bad, so many people on the edge financially, you have instituted a law that gives people an opportunity to make $10,000 on reporting someone who is assisting a woman in their moment of greatest need. Now, in effect, it's a bounty hunter. That's a bounty hunter law. That's what it is. It's what it is. And not only is it a flagrant violation of the 14th Amendment and established precedent for 50 years. Good question. I just saw this. Who provides the bounty money? It would be the person that they successfully sue who aided and abetted. And basically, it's just you go to court and you say, I think this person helped this woman. Did they or didn't they? Then they get $10,000. That's how that works. It's also an egregious violation of the First Amendment. So let's talk about this. Right now, if you are a 16-year-old girl, 20-year-old girl, 35-year-old woman, and you find yourself with an unexpected pregnancy, and you go to a coffee shop with a family member or someone you trust, and you talk about how ending this pregnancy is a choice that you think you need to make. Someone, anyone, friend, family member, complete stranger, could follow you and attempt to sue you for having the conversation because you were aiding and abetting and giving advice to that woman. Lyft and Uber have both instituted policies that will protect their drivers from these lawsuits if they're launched against them, if they drive a woman to get reproductive advice from someone, if they drive a woman to a clinic. It is unclear as to whether or not this is limited to Texas, or if citizens who are organizing right now in the United States could potentially be sued for bringing women to other states to help them exercise their fundamental rights. And it incentivizes reporting, vigilantism and reporting on your neighbor, on a friend. Now, you would think that the United States Supreme Court would look at that and say, I don't know if it's a good idea to let that kind of reporting go on in the United States. That seems problematic. They, however, chose to take a pass. And on something that they call the shadow docket, which they're using more and more and more to put these sort of egregious things out there, what they did is the majority of the United States Supreme Court said, well, we can't stop this bill from going into effect because it's individual citizens who are enforcing the law, not the state. Ah! My hair is on fire. They on a technicality decided not to rule on this because it was complicated. And they weren't sure who had standing to bring the lawsuit to stop this from taking place. Because we've been trying to sue the Texas government for allowing this to happen. Supreme Court says, well, it's individual citizens. I guess we're going to have to wait until an individual citizen does this and then sue that individual citizen to see if we can get a ruling. De facto, with the United States Supreme Court taking a pass on this, this is now law in Texas. And it will remain law until someone can figure out how to get around the bounty hunter aspect of this law. Because for some reason, our legal system doesn't know quite what to do about this, even though we have a history of this in the United States. It's new, it's never happened before. We don't know how to rule against this. Well, fantastic. So, okay, So Florida and South Dakota have already signaled plans to introduce similar legislation in their states. The Supreme Court has a potential case coming from Mississippi that could be a ruling on Roe versus Wade itself in the fall of 2021. But let me talk just quickly about some other things that Texas passed that have something to do with all of this. So if this isn't bad enough, let's talk about this. So other bills that Texas has passed recently have to do with teaching about race in schools. And it's a response to teaching quote unquote critical race theory. And it's in response to having those conversations in context with Black Lives Matter and in context with recent events. You know, SB 8 in Texas is going to disproportionately affect women of color and low-income women who can't find their way out of the state, who can't find their way into another state, who can't take the time off to travel, okay, et cetera, et cetera. So here's another way that they're boxing people in, and this is about teaching. So now in Texas, one teacher and one campus administrator is now required to go through civics training, whatever that is. If teachers discuss current events on racial tension in the United States, they must give equal time to both sides, because of course there's good people on both sides. Students are not to be instructed about the 1619 Project, which discusses when slavery actually came to the shores of the United States. The advent of slavery can only be taught as a deviation from American principles. It prohibits students from earning extra credit for political activities or activism. Any school district that uses any online portal must give parents access to all of the materials that they're providing to the kids, so the parents can watch and make sure that their kids aren't being taught about racial matters. Parents can't sue teachers directly, so that's good, but school districts can enforce and sanction teachers who deviate from this policy. And the bill removed a requirement to teach the history of white supremacy in the United States, but won't punish teachers who mention it. That matters. Texas also in the last week instituted permitless carry for firearms. Now in Texas, anyone 21 years of age or older can carry a firearm, either concealed or not, with no permit, no license. So permitless carry was instituted. And they also instituted voter suppression legislation, including an ID requirement for vote by mail, enhances protection for poll watchers who are watching to make sure things are being done right, okay? Makes it a felony for local election officials to proactively distribute applications for mail-in ballots, even to those who qualify for it. So suppress the vote, allow unlimited use and carry of firearms, crack down on teachers, make sure they're teaching the right things, and crack down on women and women's autonomy. And all of this is connected to all of the legislation and the Supreme Court decisions they didn't like in the 60s and the 1970s. So that's where we are. Women in the United States are actively being harmed as we speak, being prevented from not only seeking reproductive services, but talking about seeking reproductive services. That is a chilling effect on the First Amendment, on freedom to assemble, to get together with friends and family and talk about this, to freedom of speech. What can I say on my own behalf to advocate for myself? How much danger am I putting my family or friends in if I ask them what to do? Who can I trust? Who's going to turn me in? Who's going to force me? Who is going to force me to remain pregnant and give birth? Who is going to force me to do that? Who's going to get the money? What happens to me? What happens to my life? So there are a number of responses, right? This thing is new, it's fresh, we're all still kind of screaming. We'll kind of stop screaming and sort of get things going here shortly, I am sure. But there are a couple of things happening in September and October right now that we need to pay attention to. Now, the Biden administration has come out and said that they will use all of the tools at their disposal in the Department of Justice and in the administration to protect women in Texas. The problem is the Department of Justice has only offered that women can't be physically threatened or beat or attacked if they, pursue reproductive services. So apparently that's kind of where the DOJ is. Just don't hit anybody, and we'll be fine. Nancy Pelosi has signaled that they will bring legislation to protect Roe v. Wade into the House of Representatives. Senate is already signaling that they'll filibuster it and they won't pass it. October 2nd, the Women's March is getting together in all 50 states in the United States, and hopefully we will see the kind of turnout in the international community to support women's reproductive rights on October 2nd. So the October 2nd protest for women is going to be held in the United States, which is 2 days before the Supreme Court reconvenes for its fall session. There is a sisterhood underground that's being put together. A lot of women are organizing on how to get money and resources to get women out of Texas who may need help. So there are groups who are organizing to help women. And at the same time that this is going on, that women are organizing and becoming active, Trump campaign rally, Trump campaign operator is set up the Justice for G6 rally for September 18th in Washington, D.C. to rally for the people who've been unjustly accused of doing exactly what they did, which is attacking the Capitol. From what I can see, the September 18th rally is not going to be a huge thing like January 6th. In fact, a lot of the white supremacist groups are saying we shouldn't go to it because it's been planned and announced and they're going to be waiting for us. So I don't know that September 18th is going to turn into a conflagration by like January 6th did, but we can expect representatives from the United States government to show up to the Justice for J6 rally on September 18th. Now, So now I'm going to get personal, because all of the things that we talk about, history, philosophy, political movements, gun rights, legislation, Supreme Court decisions, it comes down to affecting women personally and men personally, people of color personally. Now, I am aware of stories in my family of some of the elder generation who almost died from botched abortions and back alley abortions in the 1940s and 50s. My mother had a terrible pregnancy, almost died having me. I'm an only child for that reason. It was only because of the 1967 ruling that she was able to get contraception on her own without having to get my father's permission for it. No one could stop her from doing that. And her doctor said that. You need to go to Planned Parenthood. No one can stop you. You can get an IUD and come back to me, and I'll make sure that it's paid for. Now, I grew up in a world where I could have contraception, and that's great. That's great. That was necessary for me. I wasn't cognitively able to have a child at 16, 17, 18. Are you kidding me? No. And I, against medical advice, because I am just that type, when I was 27, the clock started ticking and I decided to have a child. And I got pregnant. And my doctors were right. That wasn't the smartest idea I'd ever had. I had a terribly, terribly psychologically, emotionally, and physically difficult pregnancy. And I wanted that child. And I forced myself to go all the way. I had morning sickness, noon sickness, night sickness. I lost 12 pounds in my first trimester. The doctors had to outfit me with an electronic device that would send electrical signals into my arm every 30 seconds. And I had to wear that for 8 months in order to finish the pregnancy. I didn't go into labor by myself. Of course not. So I had to have my labor induced. And it took me 3 hours from there to deliver. 3 hours. Any of you who've been pregnant and who've been through a delivery, you know that I went from 0 to 100 and had a child in 3 hours. And that was traumatizing itself, right? But I have this beautiful kid and I love this kid. This kid is my everything. This kid is my world. However, I made an announcement in the hospital. I am not doing this again, ever. Because I have just had a beautiful, healthy child, and I am not risking my life, and I am not risking my being sidelined by a horrible pregnancy and not being able to take care of this child when she's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I knew at that moment this was not going to be a thing I wanted to repeat. And I lived in terror for the next 3 years that it took me to go to my OBGYN and ask him, please give me, please, tubal ligation. Please, I need to get my tubes tied. 3 years going in every 3 months and saying, I want to get my tubes tied. Because not only do I not want her father involved, if her father and I break up, I don't want anyone. I'm done. You'll change your mind. You'll change your mind. We really shouldn't do that. Finally, on the 3rd year of asking, my OBGYN made me bring my husband in to sit down in the chair next to me and tell my doctor that he approved of my decision to do this. In 1998, I had to legally, I didn't have to ask for my husband's permission, but my OBGYN was not going to let that happen until I asked my husband's permission. And he just basically came in and said I was of right mind and sound body and I could make reproductive choices for myself. The only thing that kept me from going completely insane, keeping my husband at arm's length, which was great for our marriage, was the fact that I knew that in the event that I did get pregnant accidentally, that I would have an option. Now, I don't know what my decision would have been in the moment of having the second announcement that I was pregnant a second time. I don't know what I would have done. I don't know. Would I have bulled through and done it again? Maybe. Would I have done something to take care of it to preserve my life and my economic status and my ability to cope? Maybe. The fact is, I had that choice. I had that choice. I was going to be able to make that choice for myself when that time came. That choice has been stripped away from women in Texas. That choice disadvantages women in Texas. Taking away bodily autonomy for women, and I told you this, you guys this. During the January 6th fiasco, I was like, watch what happens next. They're going to assault the bodies of people of color and women because they want to go in reverse. Because Roe v. Wade is the thing that's most controversial. So if they get Roe v. Wade, then they can go after interracial marriage. Then they can go after equal rights. Then they can go after eliminating the civil rights that we've had in the United States and preserving this new version of the US that Margaret Atwood could have only dreamed about. So that's the state of play, everyone. That is the state of play in the United States. Something egregious has happened, something terrifying has happened, and we have to find a way through this. We have been abandoned by the United States Supreme Court. And now we organize, now we fight, now we protect, now we honor the dignity of women to make their choices, to vote. Our sisters of color, everyone needs to pay attention to what's happening in the United States right now, because this is an experiment in Texas. This is an experiment, and so far they're winning. And I don't know what happens next. The 2022 elections could not be more important. The 2024 elections will determine the future of this country. It is that bad, and we are that much closer to the edge than we were, because citizens are now being encouraged to inform on other citizens in the most egregious way possible. So those are my comments on what is happening. I will be sure to keep you updated if you would like on how this political melange plays out in the US. You can tell I'm passionate about this issue, but I don't make any apologies for that. And I'm glad that Humanity Rising has given me a forum to talk about issues that are critical and important to the preservation not only of life and autonomy and choice and citizenry, but preservation of democracy itself, which is on the line right now in the US.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you so much. I think of all your presentations, this has been the most powerful and moving. You know, it's kind of hard to take in that it was only in the 1960s and 70s that women could get a checking account and get their own credit cards. It's an extraordinary fact that seems almost unbelievable, and it was given begrudgingly, and there's elements in the culture that resent and resist, and now find an opportunity to roll things back. So it's not like that you have a liberation or a breakthrough and then you build on it. You have to keep fighting the battle over and over again. And so I just want to just acknowledge your mastery of the information and your courage in telling your own story, and just thank you for that. It's been quite powerful. So thank you. I have a couple questions. One is, based on the state of Texas, what is happening with other Republican-controlled states? Are there copycat laws that are taking place? So what's happening on the basis of Texas?
Yes, since really the 2020 election, there have been a number of states and Republican legislators who've been pushing these anti-choice bills, anti-autonomy bills. They've been doing it in sort of 20 weeks, 26 weeks. It's just been with the Supreme Court. But they always had the idea that we may have to take this to the Supreme Court and we may lose. So there's been a little bit of a little bit of a break. We're going to push it as far as we can push it, but we won't take it away completely. Texas is the first state to not only basically take it away completely, but to have the United States Supreme Court ignore the issue. And so the states that were just playing around the edges are absolutely going to copycat this. There's no reason. And they have an incentive to try to get it done immediately when they come back from summer recess, because the Supreme Court, like I said, has that Mississippi case that may be an overturning of Roe v. Wade itself. But the longer these laws stay in place and the more normalized they become, the harder it is to get them out, right? So they're playing a game now of how fast can they institute these bans in other states, and how long can they extend those things before the Supreme Court rules in that Mississippi case. And so, yes, that's absolutely happening. Voter suppression bills, 100%. Women's rights bills, 100%. Yeah.
Then another question is around the capacity of the federal government, either through the Biden administration or Congress, to do anything about this, because it would seem to me that if we could mobilize at the national level with federal legislation, we might be able to ameliorate what's happening in Texas. What's your sense of possibility or not at that level, given the narrow margins in both the House and the Senate?
If the Democrats don't get rid of the filibuster, nothing. We can introduce legislation in the House. We can get it passed. That's not the issue. Sending it to the Senate, we have senators who are already signaling they won't support any bill that comes that way because they believe in states' rights. Remember, states' rights is always goes back to that, slavery thing. Oops, states' rights. But yeah, without getting rid of the filibuster, Congress is stuck. They're just not going to be able to get it through. With Roe v. Wade, if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns that, it's open season on women in the United States, and they stacked the court during the Trump administration. Like I said, the response from DOJ so far has been lackluster in, well, just don't hurt anybody. Well, we'll protect women from getting beaten. Well, okay, can we take that a step further? Just a step further. So the DOJ might come up with something. I'm baffled why bounty hunting is not like a problem. Like, can't you legislate around maybe bounty hunting isn't a good thing to have? Can we all agree on that? Like, maybe we shouldn't get money for informing on our neighbors. I don't know. Yeah, I'm stuck. They need to respond, but they seem to be confused by this Texas bill. Like, they have no idea how to respond to it. So I'm concerned about that. Yeah.
I have a few other questions, but if there's any women that want to join the session and say something, please indicate it in the chat. We have about 15 minutes left, and we'd be happy to promote you so you can make a statement. I noted there was one woman who lives in Austin, Texas. You may want to say something about the situation there. And as we wait for that, the two questions, Shelley. One that just came in: who's funding all this? What's the power brokers behind this attack on women in this particular case?
Political action committees of the Republican Party, absolutely, and religious groups, the Right to Life groups. So it's private money that goes in through those kind of nonprofits that work to take this away. And it's also political. And now let's remember, Texas is a purple state. Texas was reliably Republican, but Texas is close to flipping into the Democratic territory. So the Republicans in Texas have every incentive to stop anyone with any Democratic leanings from moving to Texas right now and registering to vote. So not only are they trying to strip the vote away from their own citizens, but this is absolutely meant to discourage anyone from coming to Texas, moving to Texas, who doesn't want to be under this kind of egregious law from becoming a potential voter in the future. So it's political down to the core, down to the core. It's not about women. This is about control, through women. That's where we come in.
Yeah. Making Texas safe for Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point.
And let's mention no consequences for men, by the way.
Well, I was just going to ask that. I was just going to ask that because that came in the chat, just to state the obvious.
Yep.
That in terms of rape or incest, there's no consequences for the men.
Yep.
All the consequences are on the women's side.
Yep, absolutely. No consequences for the men whatsoever. So yeah, it's frightening. It's funny. There's a saying that, when men were asked the question, what are you most afraid of if you were alone in a room full of women? And the men said that they would be laughed at. When you ask the same question of women, if you're alone in a room full of men, what are you afraid of? And their response is that we'll be killed. That shows the vast disparity between our experiences and psychologically. That is incredibly powerful. I go back to that all the time. Men are afraid of being laughed at. Women are afraid of being murdered. We live such different lives. We live such different lives in the US and anywhere. This is a women's issue anywhere. It's not just the US. It's anywhere.
A general question that I'd love to hear your comment on, Shelley, is this whole discussion around Christofascism, that behind the Texas laws is an attack on women, attack on color, attack on the environment, for all the reasons you state. But enveloping all of that is this alliance between the white evangelical Christians and the Republican Party. That's the nexus of the power that is effectuating all these laws and maintaining the filibuster in the Senate and moving out in the Republican-controlled areas around the country. So I would love to just hear your perspective and your comment on this larger coalition that's beginning to actively mobilize ultimately for the suppression of democracy itself.
Yeah, the religious right has always been a problem in America. like they've used the Bible to justify slavery. They've used it to justify all sorts of things. They use it against the LGBT community. They use it against women. They love to base that, well, Eve ate that apple first. She's a bad one. It goes so far and so primitive into this story, but they have been effectively co-opted by political and economic interests that want to see their political policies being enacted. And they see this alliance with these ultra religious people as cover for what they want to do anyway. It's being done in the name of God and righteousness and life, not being done for the crass political purposes for which it's actually being done for, right? So they're using them. They've been effective and they're puppets. And if you think about it, any religious fundamentalism has a stroke of authoritarianism built into it. If you are ultra religious and you believe that you are dictated to and that you are here to serve a particular deity, authoritarianism is built into your DNA. If you are a religious person, it is very easy for you to look at a politician and substitute them for your deity, because you are already programmed to follow the laws of the church, to follow the laws of the pastor, to follow the laws of the priest, right? This is how the sexual abuse scandals went berserk. This is how the Native American, or indigenous peoples, this is the same instinct. It's the same fundamentalist instinct. And I don't care whether it's Christian or Islamic or anything else.
Exactly.
Anywhere you see religious fundamentalism kicking in, you will see a concomitant authoritarian impulse. The interesting thing is when totalitarian states get to the point where they erase the deity and they substitute the politician for the deity. For example, North Korea, right? They decided, well, we don't want the alliance really between the religious we're just going to be the religious fundamentalism. And that's what, or eliminating religious thought, period. I mean, there are countries in the in the world that have authoritarian states that prohibit the exercise of religion, specifically because the state becomes the religion. So there's a very structural relationship between fundamentalism and political extremism. And those people who are trained to follow that are often trained to follow a leader, a cult leader who knows better than they do, who takes the burden of decision-making away from them. And in a hyper-complex society with pandemics raging and economics and climate change raging, et cetera, people are so alarmed that they're backpedaling into sort of this medieval, you know what, we're just gonna let them take care of it. We're gonna let them eliminate all the people who are stressing me out. I don't like women. I don't like gay people. I'm just going to go with whoever's going to remove those things because I'm so terrified of the bigger things and feel so overwhelmed that they're just defaulting back to this medieval pre-enlightenment philosophy. The king will tell us. We accept our place in the universe. At least we're not as bad off as they are. That's structural. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have Kathy Winter that put her hand up. Kathy, welcome. If Rick, if you could promote her and activate her audio, possibly her video, would love to hear from you, Kathy.
She's open.
Katie, I'm sorry. Welcome.
I'm asking her to unmute and start her video. There. Should be there.
All right, let's see if I can hear this. There we go.
Hello.
Hi, Katie. We have a few minutes. Would just love to hear what you have to say.
Thanks so much for the space. I really appreciate this conversation today. I think myself and millions of Texans are kind of freaking out at this point. It's been a scary and kind of a shocking, past few months with these special sessions and, a true fight here in Texas, here in Austin, here at the Capitol. It was lovely to see so many dozens of our legislators storm out of the Capitol to try to stop all this from happening. And yet it's strong-armed into happening. So, it's a tough week. I feel, I feel, that this fight to really do something about this disgusting legal situation we have here. I really appreciate this conversation this morning because this concept of the vigilante is really resonating. I hadn't, I'm in the minutia of all these things happening, and my head's been buried in redistricting for the past several weeks to try to figure out how I might, testify to help, I don't even know where to start with that. I live in Austin, which is just the most gerrymandered city in the state for sure. Which is how I don't have any representation here. The Democrats in Texas don't have any representation. So it helps me to kind of get my head out of this minutia to see this overarching idea that, like, this is a long-standing concept. This is a long-standing dynamic that's been going on for many, many decades. And yeah, it just validates a feeling of lack of safety, where it's like, who's carrying a gun, and like, where have we just rewound to in history all of a sudden?
Mm.
And you know, it feels very racist, or, you know, the way that nationally things are being handled, it feels sort of like, you know, for me, I'm a privileged white lady with a car and a flexible schedule, and if I needed an abortion, I could drive to New Mexico. But, you know, the level of crisis that would be for somebody, a person of color, or somebody who does not have the same privilege that I do, is not being spoken to at the national level. And so yeah, I go on all day about this, but I just want to say I really appreciate this conversation. And if you have any input for me on ways that I can be effective, especially with the redistricting, I'll be testifying a couple of times over the next couple of weeks, that I would love any input you might have.
That's a big
Well,
challenge.
just a couple of quick questions, Katie. What's the kind of the atmosphere there in Texas? Because we're outside of Texas and we've kind of taken it sort of from the outside in. You're on the inside. What's the discussion in the neighborhood or among your friends? Is it just pass them by and no one's particularly talking about it, or is it? Are you folks as shocked internally inside Texas as we are shocked externally? What's the discussions in your network?
Yeah, I live in Austin, and so it's a liberal network of progressive folks who I think are feeling very powerless and very angry, very unrepresented, and incensed, and just scared, really exhausted and scared. Austin is not represented legally. Like, we do not have we have one congressperson. We have 6 districts, and one of those congress people is Democratic. And so we scream to the heavens and nobody's listening. The rest of, you know, but there's also a divisiveness like there is everywhere else, you know, in Austin and in other places. There's a lot of conflict. There's a, you know, I think for me, I don't have that many people in my network who would be for all this stuff that's going on. And I think that's the same case. It's like, people who are excited about what Governor Abbott has going here don't know many people like I do, like I am. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I see.
Shelley, any comment?
We're terrified on your behalf. It's maddening and frustrating and terrifying, because now the questions start to come: who can we trust? Who can we talk to? Who you begin to establish that kind of mistrust, and democracy breaks down because you're no longer able to have a conversation in a public place. You're no longer able to advocate in a public place in the same manner in which you were able to do so before. And a lot of people who support, not a lot of women, but there's considerable amount of women who support what's happening with Abbott. Women aren't a monolith. The United States as a whole, 70% of Republican and Democratic voters support bodily autonomy for women. But this kind of chilling effect, how do you rage when you don't know who you can rage with? How do you cry when you don't know who you can cry with? This is so bad. This is so much worse than I ever thought even overturning Roe v. Wade would be. This is so much worse than because of the additional things that they have put into this poisonous legislation. And the thought of this spreading across the United States is it's just horrifying. Katie, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just know that there are lots of us, lots and lots and lots of women who are getting together to do something about this. I think they have finally, maybe the dog finally caught the car. You know what I mean? Like maybe they finally succeeded with something that was so disgusting that it's going to provoke the kind of backlash it needs to provoke. My fear is it won't. The backlash won't come because people are economically down, scared. I'm afraid the backlash won't be as big as it needs to be, but God darn it, let's backlash, you know? So Katie, I'm with you. I feel you.
Thank you so much.
A quick question, Katie, and then I think we have to start wrapping it up from Dahana Rice here. Do you find that the perpetrators of this kind of catastrophic order, are they mostly older? Are there young people there in Texas who are supporting this? What would be the demographic that, as you observe it, is taking shape?
Only 28% of Texans are actually on board with what just happened. There are only 28% of people in the whole state who who approve of this special session bullshit. It feels like Greg Abbott's power hungry. I've heard it said that he's sort of playing to his primary vote, the people who vote for him in the primaries. And you know, it's this fringe, you know, we also have Ted Cruz over here. It's these guys who are really out on the fringe, who are just grappling for any power that they have to do these radical types of moves and, you know, showcase what they can do when they're in that position, is what it feels like. It's been confusing because he also recently is mandating you can't make kids wear masks in school. And it's confusing because it's like, you're not winning. You're not going to win an election putting kids in danger. Like, what are you thinking right now? This doesn't even make sense. This isn't a political move. This is just radical. You're just fighting against who? Like, you're fighting against whoever's going to fight you. I don't know if that makes sense. It doesn't, it's not the numbers. It's this fringe group that supports this radical approach to the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I hadn't taken in it. Only 28% of the people, even in Texas, support this. That means 72% do not, or at least are neutral.
Are neutral, yeah.
Yeah. So a final question to you, and then I'd like you to have a final comment, Shelley. Katie, what can we do? What do you need? If you offer some advice or what you need to support what you're doing there, how can we help?
It helps to see that people are talking about Texas. Like, here, this is an international group here. It helps to feel like Texas is being mentioned and the fact that other people are aware. But I think just in general, for what I've been focusing on, it's like, it's easy for liberal folks to say, okay, Biden's in power now, everything is okay, but this is not a time to relax. Like, midterm elections are so important. And that's where things can happen, to where, like what happened with Obama, he had a lot of ideas. This is where everything spreads itself around so that Republicans stay in power. And so this is the most important time for us to focus on redistricting, I think, is where I'm putting my attention, and generally keeping, we are purple and blue more so than ever. And if we have fair elections and if we get representation at the legislative level, we can win these elections, but we have to fight against people who are trying to suppress us and people who are trying to cheat and con their way in power.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, Shelley, and thank you, Katie. Thank you for speaking up, and we wish you well. And I'm sure there's something that can still be done, but it's not altogether clear what that is, given the complexities of the circumstances, both at the state level, but also at the national level in which we all find ourselves. So Shelley, any final words from you? Anything that you would ask us as a call to action, given our situation?
Sure. Get involved, speak up, tell your stories, support the National Organization for Women, support Planned Parenthood, support Indivisible and political groups. Stay politically active and engaged. Stay engaged on redistricting. That's absolutely crucial. This is how the minority is executing their will of tyranny over the majority, is through these technical changes that they're making, sometimes street by street, to ensure that they maintain control. Support people of color, support Black Lives Matter, support those things and stay engaged and don't get tired. See, we're running a marathon here to save democracy in the United States. And we've been taking some hits for the last 40 years. It's not new. Last 40 years, particularly badly now. Now is not the time to let up. Now is not the time to think it's over. So stay politically active. Vote. Register people to vote. And support women. Support women in your life. If you have a relative in Texas who needs a way out, get them a way out. This is the time to step up and help each other, and not just online, not just social media, not just whatever. It might be time to step up with a plane ticket. Might be time to step up with a spare room in your house. It's getting real. So let's meet it. Let's meet the challenge of today and say, you will not push us back with a medieval consciousness that believes it can execute its will on another sovereign human being. No, not here, not now. So let's stay engaged. Let's not give up. Let's not get tired. Let's take a breath, try to figure things out and move forward.
Thank you, Shelley. This was masterful today. And thank you, Katie, for sharing your perspective and making your voice heard through our broadcast today. And thank you, everyone, for just being here, being present, and being supportive as day by day Humanity Rising seeks to bring to our attention what's actually happening in the world in a ruthlessly realistic way, as we've done over the next couple of days. As it turns out, tomorrow, we're going to be hearing from some men on our theme of masculine dialogues and the responsibility of men to be aware and to be supportive. So we're going to continue this discussion tomorrow around the question, what is man? What is the masculine? In a time such as ours, when women, people of color, people of mixed gender, the people who support democracy are being actively suppressed by white men. It's a very, very profound question. What is man? And what is the masculine in our time? So that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising. But Shelley Alcorn and Katie Weiner, thank you both so much for your eloquence today. All right, everyone, that brings us to close. Thank you all, and you're welcome to join the After Chat group. You'll see the link in the chat group. So we'll see you there for those of you who could make it. Bye for now.